I got to college, and then I started taking some classes. This is why liberal arts education is so important, because while lawyers are fabulous in some individuals and a very important profession, I found that a liberal arts education forced me to think well beyond what I thought I was going to be, because I was going to be a lawyer to change the world. You know, there's a lot of injustice. I figured, well, let me follow in the civil rights tradition and you know, basically fight racism, fight sexism, fight class oppression, and the best way to do that is defend people who are being misrepresented and mistreated in the world. So I went to college and I flipped through my brochure, you know, courses to take. I'm sure I was watching TV at the same time. And I saw race, gender, and class inequality. Now, that was not in my high school curriculum. I don't know about Brooklyn in the 1990s, but the Bronx and other parts of New York in the 70s, that was not in the curriculum. Race, class, and gender inequality. I was like, the whole class is going to be about that? I mean, we're not just going to talk about it for a couple minutes and then move on to something else? So I said, okay, I'll go check it out. Now, by this point, I'm already going into my junior year, and I'd taken all the courses you have to take and here and there. And this course completely changed my entire worldview. It was in that class that I realized for the first time that the things that we experience as individuals that we know is part of a larger system is much bigger than in fact we think it is. That there is an entire structural context for everything that we're experiencing. Now, we're not completely controlled by that context. We change it, we have an impact on it, we do the things we think are important, but that structure is there all the time. Where you enter into the stream of the world has a huge impact on the options that you have in front of you. It means your paths have to be tailor-made for you. You have to figure out what your exact location is in order to figure out how to move beyond it. So this class completely changed it just completely blew my mind. I could not believe that you could actually study race, class, gender, and inequality all at the same time, get credit for it. You could, you know, talk about inequality and you wouldn't wind up in some argument about whether or not it was really there. The next class I took that completely changed my world was a course on African American literature and music and culture. Another problem with a lot of high schools in general is that, you know, the arts and the history of black people is not taught in an extended and serious enough way. And this course was a full exploration of all of the extraordinary music, culture, literature, painting that African people of African descent in the Caribbean and the United States basically created in the face of enormous stress, insult, injury, discrimination, incredible beauty, artistic talent, as well as the expression of suffering is in the music and culture itself. And beginning to see the overall picture of that was another extraordinary moment for me in college. So now I was always, after these two courses, struck with the contradiction here. Well, you know, am I going to try to save the world through fighting for people's rights and gender, race, and class and inequality, or am I going to sort of enjoy and sort of really appreciate the beauty of black literature, culture, and music as a way of getting at some of the political issues, but also, in a sense, bathing myself in the pleasure of finding spaces of affirmation? And so ultimately, as I got toward my senior year, something important happened in African American culture. And that was the recorded music of hip-hop, which is different from the original day-to-day, community-based performance of hip-hop. Hip-hop made the airwaves in '79. I was still in high school then, but in '83, '84, it began to really become a commercial venue, meaning you could actually turn on the radio and hear a song with hip-hop music in it and begin to think about it as a social force. And that was very important because now I was able to combine my interest in both race, gender, class, inequality, and the forms of inequality that people of color face, with my interest in the creative responses to that oppression. And it was in a way quite lucky that hip-hop showed up, because I'm not quite sure what else I would have done a dissertation on, to tell you the truth. It would have been a really bad situation. I'm not sure I would have made it through. But what it allowed me to do was to talk really, and to think really carefully about the way artists take on the moment in which we're living and give it back to us in a very interesting way, that artists have a very important role in our communities. They give us both their own personal opinions, but they often really reflect back on us the kinds of ideas and feelings and general assumptions that we're operating with, and what pains and pleasures and the like that we have around us. At the same time, they're operating in the same structures, the same forces of both opportunity and oppression that I talked about from that sociology class, so that a given artist is not just floating free, having ideas just for the sake of them, but is having ideas and feelings and creative impulses in the context of their situation. Hip-hop is a brilliant expression of this tension, in that it is both an extremely interesting musical, technological, cultural, and creative force, and it's also a very important, at least in its initial stages, political intervention. It completely transformed the way recorded music was used. That's one of the most important things that it did. It took the use of recorded music as simply background and turned multiple forms of recorded music, creating an entirely new recorded sound. There are a lot of theorists like to call it collage, pastiche, where you make a quilt of sounds to make an entirely new sound itself. It dramatically transformed it, so much so that the legal context hasn't really caught up. And as you know, people always argue over sampling. Is sampling a crime? Is sampling creativity? It's in fact both, in some cases. It is both sometimes a crime to steal somebody's sound and make a lot of money on it, and it's also often very creative in that it uses these sounds in new ways. It says something different. It's sometimes funny and commenting on the other usage of the music. But so the legal system was not ready for this intervention. It didn't have laws on the books for how to figure out who owned what and how much of a piece of a sound could belong to somebody. And then who did it belong to? Most artists had sold their copyright rights to the record companies just to get access to the wax. So they didn't have actually the right to say, you can't use my song, because the record companies owned the songs. Then artists started saying, well, wait a minute, I sold you the recorded rights for that song as I recorded it, but what's that got to do with the way MC Hammer's reusing it? I ought to get some money off of that. I want my rights back. Then you wind up with a fight between sometimes artists, many of whom are black-on-black artists, fighting, and record companies trying to control their previous contracts to control this new use of the music. But they don't want to control it too much, because who's making the money off of the new contracts and the new music? Record companies. So they don't want to control it too much because, one record company's making money off another record company's sample. So they figure, well, maybe next time it'll turn around and then we'll make money off of their sample, and vice versa. So this whole system of both creative enterprise, in which the entire history of recorded sound becomes, in a sense, a palette of music available now for re-recording, cutting and breaking, separating and bringing back together, is a new moment in musical history in the world. It is made possible by new technologies. It is impossible to make hip-hop without electronic interventions that begin really in the 1960s. You could not make hip-hop in the 1920s because you could not re-record recorded sound the way we do now with samplers. You could not manipulate recorded sound. You didn't have electronic beats. You didn't have a TR-808 or whatever the latest drum beat machines are. Those things did not exist. It could not have been made. Now, the musical impulses might have been there, but it actually could not have been made. Now, that's when you begin to realize, well, wait a minute, this is a moment. This music emerges in a moment of history. Well, what else is going on in this moment that makes hip-hop possible? Several things. One has to do with the total evisceration, and that's a big word for taking away, the entire taking away of music programs in New York City, music programs in Philadelphia, music programs in Detroit, music programs in LA, and the teaching of what you'd call traditional music and musicology, how to play an instrument, a band, being in a band, the marching band, etc. All of those programs in urban America were completely cut away, especially in New York in the mid to late 1970s. If you were a teenager in 1976, 1977, and you loved music and you wanted to play the drums or the bass, you kind of had to do it on your own. There was no music program. It was originally there and eventually cut for funding reasons. Well, of course, which schools still maintained music programs? The ones with money and the ones with resources. And which schools did not? The schools that catered to students whose families didn't make a ton of money and who were going to public schools in New York, right? So whose music programs were no longer available? mostly students and people of color in New York City. So what do people do who are interested and who have musical impulses? They want to hear this, they want to hear sound, they want to create sound, and you know, who's got the money to buy a saxophone and then get private lessons and then find some group of people to play with, and then where are you going to play? In your mama's bedroom? You know, it's not like there are rooms all over town just waiting for you to play your saxophone in, right? So what do people do? Well, recorded sound is already there. This, coupled with another really important factor, immigration. Post-1965, immigration between the Caribbean and the United States changes dramatically. Those of you, how many people in this room have family from the Caribbean in one way or another? Okay, so you, well, my Lord, well, how you doing? So you know post-1965 is a big deal. You know that prior to that, getting into the United States was an entirely different activity, much harder to do unless you were white. If you were Asian, of Asian descent, or of African descent, trying to get into the United States before 1965, it was not an easy job. We won't go into the details, but basically after that, the African American community dramatically diversifies. It had other immigrant groups, black before, but post-65, dramatic intervention. What do Jamaicans bring to New York? Thank you. But how do they bring it? How do they play it? Sound systems. Speakers bigger than me. Speakers bigger than this podium. Big, important influence from Jamaica. Sure, brothers and sisters had speakers over here, don't mishear me. But the power of the speaker in Jamaica was a whole nother thing. Just a whole nother animal. So you've got dub, you've got heavy bass, you've got speakers that really matter, and you've got African-American use of storytelling, you've got toasting from Jamaica and here, and you've got no place for this musical talent in the public school system, right? On top of that, you have what? Another economic intervention. This is why you have to keep these things together. The structural forces, economic, class, race, gender oppression, along with creative impulses and desires to articulate one's position. These things come together completely. Here's another way they intersect. The young African diaspora students who were in New York in this period also found themselves being tracked into vocational tech schools. Not general education for the purposes of learning literature and history so that you could go off and become a professional, but so that you could go off and fix something. So a lot of brown and black people wound up in vocational tech high schools to fix equipment. Well, you know, we think you'd be really good at fixing TVs and computers and turntables. So here, come over here to this tech school. We'll track you over here, and you'll fix stuff, and then we'll send these other children, whoever they happen to be, to the general education for the purposes of going on to liberal arts colleges and going to become whatever, lawyers, doctors, etc. So what do many of these students do? They say, well, gee, you know what? I've learned how to fix this equipment inside and out. So you know what? I'm gonna make some new equipment out of it. I don't need to just fix somebody else's turntable, somebody else's speaker, somebody else's mixer, somebody else's sampler that's not so good. I'm going to change the terms of how this technology is used. And I'm going to do it for fun because I like to have a good time. I'm still a teenager pretty much. So I'm going to make fun out of it. So all of the early efforts to use samplers in unconventional ways, Eric B. and Rakim Paid in Full. Who knows that album? Thank you, thank you. Appreciate that for the old folks in the house. You know, the sounds that you hear, that it sounds as if it's played in a basement, is deliberate. Part of it is not having access to full-scale studios that first time around, but it's also an effort to create a kind of underground sound. I mean, we call the underground now something else, but at that moment, it was about creating a very interior sound. It sounds like you're in a very small room on that album. You sound like you're underneath somewhere, a little bit almost underwater, but heavy waves. Or, you know, heavy sound waves are involved. That was a deliberate reuse of the equipment at the time. It wasn't just, I'm gonna press a button, get a beat, and talk over it. There was an attempt to change the terms of the technology. Now, the skill that students had that allowed them to have that possibility was really a skill that came out of a form of social oppression. Because everyone doesn't need to be tracked to fix somebody else's equipment. But at the same time, through that came an entirely new creative avenue and opportunity, not only for expression, but for equipment. So now new samplers are actually taking in and have taken in those creative moments to create those sounds. So there are buttons on samplers and keyboards now that mimic the sounds that were not available 20 years ago that young black and brown people came up with in order to make sounds that they wanted to hear. Now, this is a very important thing to keep in mind, it seems to me, about the power of both oppression, opportunity, and possibility. Because in early hip-hop in particular, what you had was a non-market logic. Who knows what market logic is? Anybody know what market logic is? If you don't know, raise your hand for me. I'll give you a quick, okay. Market logic is when, thank you. Market logic is when you are doing things for the purposes primarily of gaining economic profit. You do what you do to get paid. Everything else that happens along the way is extra. What you're really doing it for is to get paid. That's market logic. What is the value of what I'm doing in terms of economics? What can I get economically from this? Where's my loot? Where is it? That's market logic. How can I keep as much loot as I can, spend as little as I can in this exchange, and control the environment as much as possible? Because in market logic, controlling the environment is where profit comes from. You don't make money if everybody has a lot of power. I have to be able to really make money, I have to control as much as possible and divvy out the little bit extra to everybody else in order to control what's going on. The money is in that control. That's market logic. It's not a democratic impulse. Gee, you know, everyone's in here, let's all create a community of arts and musicians, and then we'll create something and then we'll share it. No. That's not market logic. Market logic is get mine and get paid. That's market logic. Early hip-hop did not have this framework in mind because it did not have the capacity to be marketable. Nobody thought this music would make any sense. How many times have you heard people say, hip-hop is dead, hip-hop's gone, hip-hop's gonna be gone in 2 years? I've been listening to that for 20 years. 2 more years, that's the end of it, I promise. 2 more years. I mean, it's been dying so long, it's just in a permanent death throw. I've never seen anything like it. But it keeps transforming itself, it keeps changing, and it stays alive. But the question I want you to think about today is what happened to that impulse that I've described about early hip-hop? What has happened to that impulse? And I'm going to give you my answer. You may have a different answer, and I'd love to hear your answer in the question and answer period. But let me just spend a couple more minutes talking about what I think has happened and why this is so important to us and why you need to think very carefully about hip-hop as it is such an important force in the world today, and I'm certain in your lives. Now, in the early moments, even the first 10 years of hip-hop, money was important because everybody wants to get paid. Everybody wants to pay their bills, take care of their families. I mean, that's a given. No question. I'm not going to certainly argue against that. But the ideas of musical creativity and creating community and developing spaces of free expression were more important or as important as how much money you were going to make doing whatever it is you were going to do. It really wasn't a job first because there really wasn't a job. If you watch any of those old hip-hop movies or new documentaries on the old school cats, they'll tell you there wasn't really any money in it and we didn't think there was any money in it, so we did what we did because we wanted to, because we liked to. Once it became clear, and this doesn't become clear until the late 1980s, really. Once it becomes clear that hip-hop is a big money-making institution and record companies can make a lot of money off of it and a whole lot of people are going to buy the music, then the impulse changes and it becomes a new avenue, a new way out, right? Not unlike what happens with basketball, right? I like basketball, all right, but this is the way I'm understanding it, that these things become avenues, ways out. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem if the way out included a point of view that was actually helpful to the society at large and helpful to African American young people at large. But what happened in hip-hop was that 2 things overlapped. One was, I want to get paid, and market logic. Remember market logic? Anybody forget it? Do I need to repeat it? It sounded familiar once I broke it down, right? It wasn't unknown to you. Getting paid individually and the use of market logic began to overlap. So now we have this thing called underground hip hop everybody likes to talk about when they refer to progressive rap, as the sister was describing in the quote from DJ Renegade, that progressive rap is somehow politically more progressive. Dead Prez, Common, Black Star, Mos Def, right? Who else you wanna? Right, yeah, that's way back. You gotta, it's all right, honey. You know, she's mentioning Public Enemy. I would have done the same thing, you know. But I'm trying to at least, you know, bring in the 90s. You know, I'm with you, though. I understand. You have a, you know, you get to a certain age, you just be looking back like you know, like you need medicine and stuff. You know, you start acting old before you really intend to. Back in the day when Public Enemy was big, you'd be like, shh, 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 don't say that. People will know how old you are. So who else is going on now? Let's skip the, by the 5 or 6 we mentioned, we call progressive hip hop. We already said Common, Mos Def, Black Star, Dead Prez. I'm sorry? Anybody else? Well, yeah, Tupac's borderline there, but yes, I put him on there. The Roots, that's another good choice, right? And then the Fugees, before they broke up, people thought of them this way. So you have this sort of what people call a kind of progressive, politically aware element in hip hop. But they are not really at the center of hip hop. Does anybody want to argue with that? I mean, they're important and they're my heart, but they're not really what is dominating hip hop now. Is that right? Okay, what's dominating hip hop right now? Booty music, I heard that one. Can I get another? What else? Money, money, thank you, money, don't forget money. Cash money, not just credit. Brothers don't want a credit card, they want cash money. Okay, what else do we have? Cash, diamonds, iced up. My goodness, I haven't seen, what else? Bars? Oh, cars! I'm sorry, yes, cars. See, it happens, you get old. Cars. And don't forget the strip joints. You'd think there was a strip joint on every corner in the hood. You would think that there was a strip joint every corner. If you looked at videos and thought that was the black community, can you imagine what kind of, if you did not know an African American, you just happened to flip on TV? Do you have any idea what conception you would have? I mean, you would be running to Harlem, running to Brooklyn to get paid. You'd be like, well, guess what? It's not all it's made out to be in terms of getting paid.
How about Destiny's Child?
Destiny Child, I love Destiny Child. They're not exactly hip hop in that they don't really rap. They're R&B in relation to hip hop. They're very overlapping right now, and I love Destiny's Child. They're really interesting, but they talk about money too. Bills, bills, bills. Brother wasn't getting a chance with that. And then now this one, everything I got, I bought it. You know, everything, right? I bought it. I like that one. No, but the point I'm trying to make is that there is an enormous emphasis on money, on commodities, on ice, on forget gold. We're platinum now. Gold is played out. Platinum, titanium, Gucci, Prada, everything has to be a brand name. Everything has to be over the top. And what matters? What can you give me? What can you give me? Not who you are, not are you important to me. What you gonna give me? Everything is exchange. I give you diamond, you give me, I'll let you fill in the blank. You give me X, I give you Y. But our value is what? Exchange value. That's the other point of market logic, is exchange. So I wouldn't really talk to you unless I could figure out, well, what can I get from you? What are you gonna give me? Now this is a serious problem because while I'm all for getting paid, believe me, I have to pay my rent too. There has to be something counterweighing, counter-checking, counterbalancing this impulse, which is completely, in my estimation, dominating hip hop at this moment. At this moment, I'm not talking forever. I'm not making some, hip hop is dead. I'm not saying that. But we need to think about what this means in terms of the impulse of both creativity and oppression. A musical form that was designed, in a sense, to make room for black possibility has become, in many ways, a shortcut and, in a sense, a very negative kind of effort to basically figure out how can I get paid today. Tomorrow is not interesting to me. I want to get paid today. And I want every dollar spent on luxury items to show my self-worth, because if I don't have those items, I don't have anything to exchange. And if I don't have anything to exchange, then I don't have any value in this community. And we don't even need to go into, although I'd be happy to, the details about the impact this exchange value has on black women and on male-female relationships. Because then it's always about exchange. And intimacy, vulnerability, strength, possibility is irrelevant. It's actually laughable. It's a mistake, right? Because if you're not hard all the time, and I mean that of men and women, if you're not tough and hard all the time, then you're just gonna get what? Played out. You have no idea what a crime this is to me. I'm like, so let me get this right. I'm supposed, you're my closest person, whoever you are, my best friend, my family member, my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, right? You're my closest person. But if I show any real vulnerability or weakness or fear or concern, then I'm at a disadvantage? So who needs, forgive me, the white man? I mean, who needs him if actually inside the community the same level of distance, fear, and total self-protection is prevailing? Who needs them? It's kind of a perfect intervention, right? You take care of yourself. You keep yourself away from yourself. And how do you figure out who to be with? Exchange. I'd like to talk for a minute about my favorite song right at the moment. It's R. Kelly's I Wish. Now, y'all have to know. See? All right, we got to do a little R. Kelly support in the house. What is this song about, if not what I've just been talking about? It's about his mother and her being gone and his loss, but it's about ultimately not just that loss, but how all of the commodities in the world will not make up for what he is feeling. It will not fulfill the void in his life. It's not enough platinum, not enough ice, not enough Bentleys, not enough, and never will be. And what does he say? I'll give it all up for one moment to talk to you. Now, he's already got all the Bentleys, right? He's already got everything, so we figure, well, it's easy for him to say, and to a certain degree, right? Well, you say you'd give it all up. But let's really think about that for a minute. This is someone who has it all, and in a sense, I don't have a Bentley. I got a couple diamonds my husband gave me, but it wasn't for that. I don't have any others. I'm still paying for those, to tell you the truth. And, I don't have a big house and a Bentley and all that, right? So I figure he does, and he's saying, actually, whatever it is, I'd rather give it all away. It cannot fulfill this fundamental need. And what is he ultimately asking from her? How does the song end? Who can... Thank you. Come on and braid my hair, right? Why is he saying that? He's saying braid my hair because what? It's something loving people do, an affectionate way, in a very intimate space that really is about doing something for a friend. He's not saying, let's open a braiding hair company. He's saying, come on and braid my hair here in a way that reminds me of a time we spent where what? Nothing was for exchange. Can he trust his friends? Would you be my friends if I wasn't iced up with a Bentley in a house? Right? Money and commodities have, in a sense, gotten in the way of real intimate relationships and the overvalue of them. Now, don't mishear me. I'm not saying that people shouldn't try to get paid. Of course, we do need to get paid. But it has to be one thing that we do. And the rest of what we do needs to be about building relationships. What hip-hop was originally about was taking the pieces of a landscape that, in fact, were not intended for creativity and making something beautiful out of it, not only for money, but for creative community sustenance. Now, through that happens to come money, if you do it well. But if you lose sight of that first move, which is not a monetary move, but an emotional move, a creative move, an intelligent move, and money comes from it, if you lose sight of that first move, then you're out in it for the money. You not only destroy the creativity in the art form, but you ultimately destroy yourself. You destroy yourself. And there's really no way around that. And that, to me, is what R. Kelly's trying to tell everybody. And he's trying to say it in a way that isn't really too critical, so that's why I think it works so well. He's not putting people down. He's not saying, you're a bad person for wanting these things. I have them, I understand. But he's also saying, you know what? It's not the answer. Then, you flip to the next song, and it's Cash Money and Juvenile, and, they haven't quite gotten to R. Kelly's point yet, it seems. And R. Kelly's point is an exception to the rule. But it's an exception I really want to leave you with, because I want you to think very carefully about how you're going to navigate this world that you're in. The world that you're in as students now is entirely different than the world of 1980. I mean, you'd think it was not that long ago, but it's an entirely different world in terms of what the world is, what the opportunities are, the value system, the expectations. And you have to really develop a level of critical self-awareness. That means you have to be aware of what you're doing, what you're participating in. There's so much more coming at you than there was coming at people in my age group. I mean, there were 4 TV channels. I mean, I know I sound like an old lady, and I'm truly not that old. 4 channels. You know what I'm talking about? 4 channels. I have 360 digital cable channels right now, and I flip like a fool. That's a lot of information coming at you. A lot coming. That's not counting malls and everything else, and the idea of buying and being part of this idea of representing through physical appearance, not through what you think, not through how you treat people, not through who you are, but what you buy and what you can look like. We need to turn inward more, really allow ourselves to look much more carefully at what we're doing inside of this market. And in that sense, we have to learn to be perceptive. And that's one of the ways that choosing to be a teacher has been important to me, because it allows me to take a lot of these bigger ideas and really show how they are operating every day on the ground in our lives, so that the choices we make can be informed by these ideas. You know, hip-hop has an enormously important place, and it's one of the most important, really, black cultural forms in the history of black cultural forms. There's no question about that. But that doesn't mean there aren't things that we have to raise questions about. And one of the questions I think we have to ask, and this is the question I want to leave you with, because I know we should have some dialogue. I'd love to hear what you think, and I know you have to leave within the half hour. But the last thing I really want you to think carefully about is, what vision of the possibility of your future are you participating in by what you do in your everyday life? In other words, what's your vision of your own future? And are you doing and living in the ways that reflect what you want your vision to be? How much of what we do is some distraction from what we really know we want to do, whatever it is we really want to be? How much of it is just sort of following along and participating because it's not only much easier, but there's a lot of short-term affirmation for it. Oh, you got your hair done? Oh, that looks great. Oh, you spent 8 hours doing that? Oh, that's great. Well, did you read anything? Well, I couldn't, because I was getting my hair done for 8 hours. I mean, you know, it's a legitimate concern. Same things happen in other situations. The question becomes, are we living and doing the things that are going to advance whatever our vision is? I'm not telling you what your vision should be. That's you and your choice. You have to live with that, decide that, work it out. It takes a long time. I'm still working mine out. We all have that individual project. But the question becomes, are you living with that? Are you trying to live through that, rather than just living in this moment and knowing you've got this other project called what you like, what you think is important over here? Because that will catch up with you, and then we become like R. Kelly, wishing and longing that we had taken advantage of time that we didn't take advantage of. And the market is not going to help us answer that question, because it's not interested in that question. In fact, it's interested in you not asking that question. Because that's a political question. That's a question of, well, wait a minute. Now, if I'm not really with every video being about the exploitation of black women's bodies, then that means I need to raise a question about that. Now, if I raise a question about that, that means Cash Money and whoever the country grammar have to basically change their whole profile if they're going to make money and get paid off of my sales. So now the question is, if I don't make that move, then what's in it for them to make that move? Nothing. And the more I participate, the more it becomes a reality, the more it becomes the avenue through which we all think we have to become part of the community. And then it becomes to reflect us. It creates us in reflection. We become part of it because we don't have a choice. It seems like we don't have a choice. But the choice comes in not avoiding, saying you're not going to listen to it. This is not about closing off options, but it's about raising what I call loving critique. It's a way of saying, you know what, there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of creativity, there's amazing, amazing talent. Let's appreciate that, but let's raise critique and see if we can steer things so that the creativity remains open, but that there's a wider, more balanced presentation of all that's out here. And so that the market is something that we are not, in a sense, asking to be victimized by. That we have a space that's outside the market where we can choose to be creative and choose to be part of a community. And that's the note I really want to end on. I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop there about developing your own vision and making sure the market is not running you. Thank you very much. I can field questions myself. If you don't have to, I mean, you're welcome to. But.
Dr. Rose is going to take questions herself. Before we go to the questions, however, I'd like you to find your evaluation in your program, make sure you have it, make sure you complete it, and leave it at the door on your way out. I'd like to thank Professor Rose again. Let's give her a big applause for what she has done. And I'd like to welcome you to come up to the microphone. If you have questions, you could just form a line right here.
Please.
And let's do it quickly so we have enough time to talk with her.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Rose,
Yes, hi.
Frederick Howard. Listening to what you had to say leaves me in the position of thought. I must take the positive side of the locus of control, because you have led me to think holistically of the whole matter of myself. But when I vision in my mind to do so, I see myself being faced with the oppressors who are looking to be paid. My household who is looking to be paid because it's an affirm action I have to take, because the control of locus must be internal for me to succeed with this holistic approach that you have presented to me for self-preservation.
Right.
But I'm faced with the external focuses.
Right.
Those locusts now are in enmity with me.
Yeah.
Because my position now would seem to them to be against.
I'm having trouble hearing him, because if y'all could just quiet down. Thank you. Go ahead. Right. I see the struggle.
To be against.
Okay.
So how do I control my internal locus without seeming to be offensive for those who are still driving away?
Right. Well, it's a very important framework that you set up, and it's a critical issue. I mean, this is always a major question. You know, how do you sustain yourself as part of a community and at the same time maybe go against the grain? Sometimes you have to go against the grain. I mean, do you think Malcolm X was like on the grain? Do you think everybody was just already saying what Malcolm X was saying? I mean, you have enough historical knowledge to know that's simply not the case. Do you think everybody was doing and saying what Martin Luther King was doing, what Fannie Hamer was doing? I mean, what do you think people who really stand on the cutting edge do? They raise questions that force us to see the things that we're doing. Now, what everyday people, because I'm not Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or anybody like that, what do I do, what should you do in this context, really has more to do with creating space for this conversation. I mean, probably the most important thing I would say to do is for everyone in their peer group to have the kind of conversation that I'm saying needs to go on internally in whatever small communities you have, your best friends, your family, your grandparents, whoever it is that you talk to about whatever your generation is dealing with, whatever that happens to be, that's where this conversation should go on. Now, I'm not saying the getting paid part, let me distinguish two things. When you're in a capitalist nation, everybody has to try to get paid, otherwise they wind up homeless and life does not get better. I am not saying don't get paid. I'm saying do not internalize the logic and mentality of market values. Now, those are two different things. The first one is you get paid so you can pay your bills, so you can take care of your kids, so you can take care of your parents, get some health insurance, whatever it is, definitely. But don't give up who you are fundamentally, thinking that by getting paid you're gonna get it back, because you won't. So you have to decide what your value structure is. That doesn't mean that you don't try to get paid. The question is how. And the question then becomes also, how do you treat people in everyday life? So if you need to act like a hustler in your job, that doesn't mean you need to treat everybody in your neighborhood like you're a hustler. You see the distinction? It's a very big distinction. And that would be my answer to that, so that I want to make clear I'm not trying to give you some romantic notion that getting paid is irrelevant. I mean, the last thing I want to tell, especially people of African descent in the United States, that somehow they shouldn't be worried about getting paid. That would be ridiculous. But one of the problems is that the system has, in a sense, taken over a piece of the mind. Not just the body in labor, but a piece of the mind. And that's what I want everyone to claim and take back. That's the distinction. Thank you for that question. Yes. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Ms. Rose, do you believe that MC Hammer is an influential rapper in terms of today's society? Like,
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, are you asking why I referenced him, or are you just asking me about
I'm
him?
asking you if you think he's an influential rapper and how today's rappers are portraying, you know, different types of rap songs.
Yeah.
Do you think he's the basis of which rappers, you know, branches off into various rap categories?
No, MC Hammer?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't put Hammer there. You mean a sort of like a branch or a sort of trunk of a tree from which other no, I wouldn't. Why do you ask me that? You think Hammer is that?
Yeah, because I think that's how most of the rap artists got their music, you know, from listening to his lyrics and what, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you know, there might be a Hammer, you know, a posse, a Hammer cult, Hammer group somewhere I'm not aware of, but my feeling is that Hammer is very important in terms of the entertainment element. Hammer has been very important in sort of saying, let's create a big glitzy show and let's look very stylish. He was important in bringing that to the fore. I mean, he was the glitter man, and that was definitely a sign that hip-hop had made it big, to have a lot of stage acts, lights going off. So he was important, but in terms of inspiring rap artists, I don't think he's as direct as that, but I appreciate that. He is important in the entertainment realm. Thank you. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Dr. Rose. I am fascinated with the lecture, and I am interested to know whether this kind of trend can be extended universally, especially to Africa.
I'm sorry, I couldn't make out because of the reverb. Could this trend that I'm describing be extended where?
Like to Africa, basically, and around
market?
the world. The
Yes.
market, yes.
Well, first of all, that's a great question, and it allows me to say something I didn't get to. You know how these things are. You don't get to everything, but that's a really important question. Does everyone understand the question? Okay, the question is, given these themes of sort of market value, and help me if I'm wrong, miss, but that these themes, can we look at how these trends that might be going on in the United States among people of African descent, are these trends moving in a global sense to other black communities in the diaspora and on the continent? And actually, it's an extremely important question because hip-hop is a global conversation. It is the most profitable U.S. cultural export. It costs the least, and it has the highest value overseas. It is extremely valuable at the level of exchange. And so it is what is used as a Trojan horse, so that a lot of other cultures around the world find themselves knowing a lot about hip-hop, participating in it as a way of showing their own resistance to their own communities or their own anger at marginalization in their own countries. But the reason they have access to that rap music is because of global capitalism, whereas the records of their own music that is the equivalent of rap is not available. Do you understand my point? Do I need to say that again? It was a little complicated. Okay, so I live in, I'm a North African immigrant in France, okay, which was part of the French colonial history. So I'm from North Africa, I'm from Algeria. And I'm living in France, and I'm mad because the French have decided that I'm not really French, even though they've owned my country for a century or hundreds of years or whatever, I'm just exaggerating, decades. And because they won't let me be a full French citizen, they've got me living in some bad environment, right? They're not treating me right, the police are mistreating me, and I get a song about police brutality from some rapper, right, from Warner Brothers Records, because Warner Brothers Records can have records in France really easily because of global capitalism and the power of American market. So I check out a rapper, I mean, you know, for some old lady, it might be Ice-T, might be LL Cool J, I don't know, or some recent police brutality song, and I'm mad, so I take up this rapper's vibe because I'm like, yeah, exactly. Police are mistreating me, I'm being profiled, it's not right. So now I'm listening to hip-hop, and then I make some French hip-hop. French hip-hop is huge in France among the non-white French, okay? But do we know anything about French hip-hop, really? And why is that? Because the importation power is not there. So minority communities, non-white communities around the world wind up knowing and following hip hop. So what we do here has a huge global impact. It's not just about what we do in Brooklyn or the Bronx or Staten Island or Detroit. It has a huge impact. How we represent ourselves here is very important to the global third world community. And African Americans, and the idea that the legacy of oppression here has resulted in a resistant tradition of the civil rights movement, of black power, is something that the world believes and looks to hip hop to follow through on. And so when we follow in this market logic, frequently that takes up root elsewhere, that the idea is basically money and exchange value. And that's extremely important to remember. And I think that is something we should pay attention to. Thank you. That was a wonderful question. I really appreciate that. Yes, please.
Yeah, and many artists, they rap about a lot of negativity, but they tend to talk about God a lot.
Yeah, I noticed that.
In their raps. Would you call them hypocrites?
Are you a rapper, my brother? Because you laid that out real tight like a rhyme. I don't know. Well, first of all, you know what? I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I don't think any of us are, in the last analysis, above being hypocritical. Meaning we all do one thing, say another, at one point or another. This is human being behavior. This is what we do. Now, what we need to do is developing ourselves is to try to do that less and less. Part of what growing up, and I don't mean that age-wise, I mean that just emotionally, because you could be 100 and act 10, and I know many a teenager who's way more mature than sisters and brothers I know in their 40s. I'm talking about development and self-development, to do what you believe is true and to live up to it, and to say it and do it and to bring them into agreement. Now, you know, there is a profound contradiction, I think, between raising God constantly and then looking at the traditions of exploitation that rap music is about and not raising a single question about celebrating exploitation. You know, the same rapper who'll be all about Jesus and God will then turn around and tell you, well, there are women that are B's and H's. That's just the way it is. You know, you don't have to go to college to see a contradiction in that. So I do think there's a lot of hypocritical behavior, but I don't think that's rappers. You know, market logic begins first in the mainstream American community. Gangsterism is an American historical phenomenon. I mean, we basically killed Indians, stole land. I mean, gangsterism is the basis of American history. So I'm not claiming that black people are responsible for that. But I'm concerned about black people. I'm not concerned. I'm concerned about the future of the communities that we live in and ourselves. Therefore, I feel we need to look at our own hypocritical behavior insofar as it damages us and the diaspora by extension, and also limits our options in self-development. So yes, I think there's hypocrisy, but I don't think that that's limited to either black folks or rappers, that we all face it, and that we need to raise questions about that. That's the way that you develop as a community, is to say, well, look, you know, you can't have this both ways. You know, you have to think this through. You can't just spout God and then be this exploitative and not at least raise a question. So that's a great question, too. Thank you very much. Yeah. Hi.
I know you didn't talk much about the role of women, but the role of women in rap video and the kind of the, rap video portray women, like loose. They don't, like some videos, they have women with long, straight black hair, light skin. They never have like a sister with her head tied up or covered and stuff like that. What is going on with this?
Right, right. I mean, Erykah Badu's the only one who tries to, you know, portray, at least in the soul, well, the soul movement does in general. But, you know, the question becomes really, you know, again, we look at rap videos and we want to externalize it. We want to say, you know, these videos are bad and they're not right and they're mistreating us. But, you know, we're watching them videos. Myself included. Remember I said hypocrisy. I don't watch them for pleasure. I watch them a little bit shocked. But I don't call up the, you know, BET every time a rump shaking video comes on. I have to be on speed dial if I were, because I'd have to call them every 2 minutes. But I don't call up and do that. I try to do it this way, basically. Say, look, if we can transform the way we're involving ourselves, it will have a huge impact. You'd be surprised. For every one call, every letter, or one individual behavior, they multiply it by well over 1,000 to anticipate collective response. I don't know if you know that, but if you complain individually, corporations or networks and televisions, they don't see it as one letter because they measure percentages of audiences. They know they're always talking about a percentage. So when one or two people make a complaint or lodge a concern, they understand that as multiplied by a much larger number. So if 100 of you complain, it's much bigger than 100. So don't underestimate the power of critique in terms of your concerns. But I think we are, in a sense, dealing with the idea of gender exploitation in rap music in an intense way. And I think part of it has to do with economic exploitation. And by that I mean that, I got you, brother, you're last. I won't forget you. By that I mean that, you know, when you don't have a lot of ways to really legitimately get public value. I mean, one of the histories of racism and slavery is the refusal to recognize black humanity. That black human beings, and again, we were not legitimately, quote, understood as human beings, so that the whole history of struggle has been about recognition. And when that is really denied fundamentally in a society, it seems to me that one of the things we turn to is ways to exploit other people who are more vulnerable than we are in that moment. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We do it, middle-class blacks do it, men do it, parents do it, you know, people whose religion is more Baptists do it against blacks who are, you know, whatever other religion they're not supposed to be. And I think we need to raise a question about how we're internalizing these kinds of exploitative traditions and not raising more fundamental questions about how they're having an impact on us. And that means men and women. You know, men are not the only ones responsible for those videos. Let's not forget that. That's a collective problem. Yes?
Since I know I'm not the only person thinking this, are you black, white, or mixed?
Me? I appreciate that. You know what? I do, because you are not the only person thinking it. But I talk about it in my book a little bit, so that's why I don't always raise it. I am of both West Indian and European descent. I'm biracial. And, but you know, in my generation, there were very few people of that denomination, as it were. And therefore, I must tell you that I understand myself as a biracial black person, which I know is not sensible, but it is the way I understand it, partly because there really is no other choice. I mean, one of the ways whiteness works is that you're either white or you're not. So I'm in the not. Happy to be. So that's where I am. But I appreciate that because I'm sure everybody is. All right. Thank you very much. Take care now.